All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to part one of our series, Black Lives Matter, Workplace Edition. I'm Lindsay McKee, the Diversity and Inclusion Committee Chair of the Southeastern Wisconsin chapter of the Public Relations Society of America. We are having some people kind of join in, so please excuse me if I kind of look away. The Black Lives Matter movement has really brought to light the systematic racism that Black people experience in America. And we are seeking to shine the light specifically on the Black experience in the workplace. Our D&I committee is presenting this series of free Black Lives Matter related virtual events to address what it means to be Black in the workplace, the actionable steps leadership must take to make their organizations more inclusive, how allies can advocate for Black colleagues, and how we all can continue the conversation into our personal lives. So today, in part one of this series, we're going to reflect on where companies are in their workplace diversity and inclusion efforts. And just so you know, this event is being recorded, and we will make the recording available to registered attendees following the event. If you do have any questions as we go along, feel free to use the chat feature. We're happy to help answer any questions you may have. Everyone is muted right now, and I request that you stay muted during this part of the panel discussion, and we will open it up for questions as well as a group discussion. So now I'd actually like to introduce our panel. So today's panelists are Tammy Belton-Davis, founder and principal for Athena Communications, Rodney Ferguson, CEO for Potawatomi Hotel and Casino, and Peavy Holmes, assistant director, life underwriting for Northwestern Mutual. Welcome to all of you. Now, I do have some questions prepared to ask each of you, but I also want to encourage our audience to submit questions via the chat feature as we go along. And I, along with my fellow D&I committee members, will keep checking that chat, and I'll read them aloud as well. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone. Perfect. And I'm just going to unmute a couple of our panelists here. Awesome. Okay, so to start our panel discussion, could each of you tell me about your personal journey as a Black person climbing the career ladder and how you kind of came to your current role? And some of you have a couple of roles as well. Let's go in alphabetical order. Tammy, let's start with you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. Lindsay, special shout out to you as a member of the D&I committee. Thank you for your leadership in getting this moving and coordinated. So big shout out to you and the D&I committee for all of your work. Glad to be a part of that. So where do I begin? Oh, in 1971 when I was born. No, I won't go back that long. Because I do actually have a birthday coming up pretty soon. But I will share that about now almost 11 years ago, I started my own firm, Athena Communications, which is both a public relations government affairs firm. And maybe 5 years ago or so, we really made the decision as a firm and as an organization that we would only work on transformational projects. So there was a lot of opportunities that we had with clients that we work with to do big events, to do some strategic communications. But I'm born and raised in Milwaukee. And so one of my, I think probably a hallmark of who I am is really the activist, is really the person who believes in change. I consider myself a change agent. And so we really made that decision that transformation is where we would move and land. And so I come from government, come from working in the nonprofit sector, started my firm, made that commitment. Just now 2 months ago, I added an additional role, which is Chief Diversity Officer for Milwaukee Rep. Now almost, like I said, about 2 months ago, and it really is an extension of my commitment to addressing equity issues, to making sure that community and culture and how we grow and develop as people really is where my heart is and where my passion is. And so as I think about that journey and where I started off my career in, which is, you know, smaller nonprofits and also in government, it really has been culminated sort of in this experience that I'm a change agent and that I'm using the skills around communications, using you know, the passion that I have for my city, because I believe that truly we can be better. All of that really has culminated in the work that I'm doing through my firm and with Milwaukee Rep. And I know we'll get into that a little bit, but that I hope that answers the question of just, you know, in terms of where my passion is and how, as a Black person, the impact, what I've seen, the injustices, the opportunities to strengthen and grow our community is really been because I'm born and raised in this city, and really do believe that I am a vehicle for the change that I seek.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tammy. Let's next move to Rodney. Rodney, could you tell us about your personal journey as you climb the career ladder and how you came to your current role?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me today as well. I think Tammy was 7 when I started my career. So I'm a bit older than her. Born and raised in Virginia, Williamsburg area. Went to school at Virginia State University, which is a historical Black college university. And one of my goals, during my entire career, set goals for myself. And the initial goal out of high school was to become an accountant, actually to become a CPA, a certified public accountant. One of the challenges of being a CPA at that time was, back in the 70s, was it was less than 1% of all CPAs were Black. So in order for me to become a CPA, one, I had to, work for a CPA firm. 2, you had to work there for at least 2 years. And 3, probably the most important part is passing the CPA exam, which was a 2.5-day exam of intense 4 parts that you had to have at least 75% on each part in order to pass. So as I went through Virginia State, I got my accounting degree. I was fortunate enough to get employed by one of the largest CPA firms in the world, Coopers & Lybrand, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers. So on my mission to become that CPA, I was fortunate enough to work in Philadelphia, obtain my CPA when I was there. And then after about 5 years, I got the call from a recruiter to work in the casino industry down in Atlantic City. One of my other goals was one, other than being a CPA, is to be a chief financial officer and or a partner in the CPA firm. So the offer in Atlantic City was to become a financial accounting and reporting manager, which was a stepping stone to get up to the CFO level. So to fast forward, I was fortunate enough to work for Harrah's, which is now Caesars, the largest casino in the world, for a number of years, and then progressed from there to the Golden Nugget, to Trump Plaza, and eventually wound up working in 5 different states for 9 different casinos across the continental United States. As I progressed through my career from an accounting and reporting manager up to financial controller, director of finance, I was able to achieve the chief financial officer position down in New Orleans at a Riverboat Casino startup. Then from there, multiple casinos as the chief financial officer. Then finally, in 2005 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I was fortunate enough to get promoted to the general manager's position, which is the top position in the casino industry. So I was there to help develop the casino into a full service resort, which won an award for the best boutique hotel casino resort in the country back in 2008. And then I got recruited again to become the CEO for a property in Oregon. I say, Oregon? Yes, Oregon. Not too many Black people, African-American folks in Oregon, not that diverse of a city. Oregon has made the news as of late for over 100 days, so I know that part of the country quite well. And then from there, I made my journey to Milwaukee back in April 2013. It was a trip. When I say a trip, meaning I ran into a lot of snow on the way coming to Milwaukee. But it's been a journey here. I came here actually as a CFO, left after 20 months, went back to my home state of Virginia to take care of my mom, who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And then after about 15 months, I was asked to come back to run the property, which I've been here since then. Came back as the COO, then eventually got promoted to the CEO in September of 2017. And, part of the challenge, is in this particular industry is the diversity of the type of individuals working in your organization, as well as the number of people and the type of people coming through the property on a daily basis. It's been a challenge, but at the same time, it's been rewarding. It's something I enjoy doing because I get to help make decisions that can impact a lot of people's lives, not only the guests, but the team members as well. So with that, I'll pass it on to Pete.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Peavy. Thank you, Rodney. And now thank you, Peavy.
So I'm gonna be like Rodney's son here. I followed in his footsteps. So I have an accounting degree as well. Worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers as well. So an accountant thick and through. And my career journey has been a little bit different. So as a millennial, we're supposed to be the ones that go from job to job to job. I started off in accounting. I spent the first 8 years of my career in accounting, and not knowing it, but absolutely hating every day that I was working as an accountant. That I was not put on this earth to be an accountant, but I was sticking through it because I think we'll talk at some of the later questions. But as African Americans, especially as first generation African Americans, our parents are loyal. They'll work a job and be at that same job for years. So when I was thinking about moving and changing careers, I didn't really have the board, if you will, my own personal board at the time, built up to kind of have conversations to find something that was better suited for my skill set. So I went from PwC to Baird to Northwestern Mutual, all within a 8-year period. And finally, someone said, Peavy, do you think it's you and not the company? And that self-reflection that happened afterwards was key. And I was honest with myself and the things that I'm passionate about, similar to what Tammy had mentioned. What is your purpose? What do you really want to do? So once I said, okay, I'm done with trying to be somebody else. You graduate from college and you want to be whatever your parents tell you. You go to college, you be a doctor. You hate science, but yet you want to be a doctor to please everyone else. So I was done pleasing other people, and I said, okay, what is it that I really want to do? So once I was true to myself, my career has really taken off. And enjoy working at Northwestern Mutual in the operations area. About half the country, if someone buys life insurance, about half the country is going to come to one of my teams. So in addition, I do a lot of work with our employee research group. Again, we'll talk about later as well. So I serve as the chair of our African American employee research group. So I know we got tons of questions, so that's a good intro for now.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Now, for each of our panelists, thinking about your career journey so far, what are some of the systems that you've encountered both personally and even secondhand as a Black individual that may have created barriers to yours or others' success? Let's go backwards. Peavy, let's start with you.
I would probably say that we live in Milwaukee. Milwaukee is a very segregated city, and I think some of the experiences that people who don't look like us, the experience they have with other African Americans, unfortunately, is driven by a lot of the media. And I see in the corporate environment, whether I was at PwC or whether I was at Baird, that it's almost like, okay, let's put things in place to help African Americans be more successful at our organizations. And sometimes we hear the term like, I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to hire Peavy Holmes. Like, there's no taking a risk with me. I have an undergraduate degree, double major accounting, supply chain management. I have my MBA. I have tons of experience. There's no risk. But the risk is that I don't look like you. So therefore, that comfort level has been a challenge that in all the organizations I've worked in, diversity has been so low in people's comfort level with other African Americans. Not to say that, we're not, that people aren't comfortable with each other, just in terms of the caliber at the caliber of a Rodney, the caliber of a Tammy is different than the perception that they come to the table with, and getting people over that perception that they have, that preconceived notion that they have versus the reality of the talent that they're dealing with. It's probably been my hardest barrier, and it doesn't help that although I'm 36, hopefully this lasts long. I look like I'm still in my 20s, and hopefully when I'm in my 50s, that goes that way, and I don't look all of a sudden like I'm in my 80s.
And that's the interesting kind of part of it. Like, not only are you African American, you have kind of this other about you of being younger as well, just another risk that people sort of see. Kind of thinking about that same otherness, Tammy, let's go to you, because you are African American and a woman. What were some of those systems that you've encountered that kind of could have been a barrier to your success?
Oh, sure. I think when I think of systems, I think of the larger systems, economic, social, political. And I would say that there is no system that's on the planet that my existence has been impacted by. I think there is my journey throughout my life has not necessarily evolved around corporate structure, not until I started my entrepreneurial venture and my business. A lot of it was working, in somewhere where there's a lens of community and community impact. So I was well aware of the need for change. But I would say, I think when I show up in a workplace, this question around gender and race identity is huge. And my position is that I show up as a Black person first and as a woman second. And so I'm aware of the pressures, I'm aware of the barriers that have come by being a person of color, by being someone who identifies as female, what that looks like, and and there's certain expectations, and there are certain barriers that exist and have existed in a number of these, work environments. And I think, Peavy makes a really important point, which I think gets to the heart of some of the questions that we'll answer later around EDI, and that is this idea of taking a risk, this idea of what it means to be other, and that, what is that rooted in? The fear of what other is. And to be honest with you, while I recognize that they have been barriers and potential impediments, they also have been great opportunities. Like, the way that we have grown, Athena, I will say very specifically, is because my race and my gender are my superpowers. Like, I am coming with a perspective that is not the norm in some of these workplaces or in these environments. I come with the lens, both as a person of color, and my own experiences that really can shape an organization for the better. And so where I'm fully aware that those have been places that perhaps could have been, hindrances in my growth. I needed to both look at that as an opportunity, and an opportunity to say, you need to choose me. You need to connect with me, because the experiences, the background, the know-with-all, all of these things that may be perceived again as barriers could be great opportunities. And so, I see it absolutely as being a superpower.
I love that. And Rodney, you kind of mentioned this a little bit. You came in, you said it was like 1% of CPAs in the business. Talk to us about some of the barriers you face, but also, just like Tammy mentioned, any opportunities you found as you went along the way as well.
Sure, yeah, actually it was less than 1%. Back during that time, and certainly, things really haven't changed in, say, 400 years in this country too much. You would think would have changed, even, having a black president in office. But, even when I first started in the CPA firm, we're fortunate enough that I think it was the CPA kind of put pressure on the CPA firms to hire more blacks to allow them to become CPAs. In the year I started, they hired, in the Philadelphia office, 400 professionals. They hired 60 in July, 60 in August, 60 in September. And they hired one black in July, one black in August, and one black in September to reach a, say, quota. They also hired one female in each of the respective months. So I said, okay, just give me an opportunity to prove myself. I think today, there's still that perception out there that you still have to prove yourself, even though you qualified, even though you have a good solid degree, even though you have the credentials, it doesn't really matter. There's a perception that if you are black, that you're not really quite there yet in terms of being qualified for the position. As I worked all across the country from New Jersey to Louisiana to Indiana, New Mexico, Oregon, Wisconsin, Virginia. Everybody still feels the same way in terms of the perception. What barriers I had to overcome is having to work harder and prove that I can do just as good or better of a job that my counterpart actually could do. And that's the only way that barrier can be kind of like broken in order to succeed. I've been in positions where I've functioned as the acting person in charge, but they wouldn't give it to me because of my skin color. It happened in multiple places. And not until I actually moved into, say, Indian country, where you have a Native American actually owning the business, have there been more receptive, being more receptive in terms of allowing me to prove that I can actually do the work just as good as anybody else. So I think that mindset is changing a little bit. I read an article today about McDonald's, and its diversity has gone down since their first black CEO has left office. And the question is why? There's only 3 black CEOs in Fortune 500 companies. The number of board members in these large companies are gone down. Why? Is the question. The question isn't whether there's qualified candidates out there. The question is, why aren't the folks in charge allowing people of color an opportunity to prove that they can actually do the work and do the job themselves? So I think it's still that, say, systemic racism in the corporate world as it is out in everything else across the country that has to change. We have to just open our minds and our hearts and say, look, this country is not just one race. It's made up of all kinds of people that can actually do work regardless of your skin color.
Absolutely. And that kind of gets into another kind of part of this, the part of leadership in making these changes, whether it's, Rodney, like you mentioned, that kind of larger organization that set guidelines on how to proceed, or even within the organization, making different changes. Rodney, could you tell us a bit about kind of your diversity and inclusion efforts? It's really more of a culture than just a specific D&I lens, and I'd love to just hear more about that.
Sure, in particular here at Potawatomi, the fortunate part is, the casino opened back in March of 1991, and it opened with the culture in place of diversity being first. It's part of our mission, vision, and values of the property. The tribe historically has decided that, they struggled for years in terms of trying to regaining their purpose in their own land. And once they were afforded the opportunity to have a casino, they said, you know what? We're going to give back to the community. We're going to make sure that our business is going to model what the city looks like. We're going to make sure our employee base is going to mirror what the city looks like. So we kind of built our employee base that kind of mirrors what our guests look like when they walk in the door. Sometimes when you have members from your organization that comes from different parts of the country, they don't necessarily see the same culture at their place they have worked at. So you have to kind of like educate them in terms of, this is what our mission is. We want to make sure that everybody's given an opportunity to advance. That's what we have. Over 60% of our team members are still people of color. Even during the COVID situation, still over 60% of people of color. Some of our management team has left because the table games is no longer here, and food and beverage is no longer at the level it was before. But we still try to make sure that every person is afforded an opportunity to, one, work here, two, advance within the structure. And we'll continue to have that in place. And I've worked, like I mentioned before, all across the country where we didn't necessarily have those structures in place. And I said, once I got myself in a position of authority where I can make that decision, I want to make sure that we put that practice in place, that we monitor those practices and make sure that we stick to that and measure it on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rodney. Peavy, you also belong to an organization that has a very robust D&I kind of program. Could you talk about first your role as chair of the African American Employee Resource Group, but also about NM's larger D&I efforts, even into its field?
Yep. So I've been the chair since January. So usually the chair serves 1 year. You serve as vice chair for 1 year, then chair for the next year of our African American Employee Resource Group. So it's been a great experience. Have an awesome team. Our governance team is comprised of employees across the company, and you don't have to be to belong. You don't have to be of that particular affinity group. In this case, you don't have to be Black to be a part of our governance team or a part of our membership base. You just have to be down with the cause, right? And you got to be willing to do some work if you're on the governance team. So we have about 24 people on our governance team, and we do a range of different things. Our view is to supplement what the company already has in place, and our company already has some outstanding things in place, and we are the enhancer to those things. So I look at Tammy as a great partner and resource that we worked with her last year. We held our first leadership conference, and Tammy had organized, I believe it was five or four speakers that were Alonzo Kelly, Thelma Science, amazing job. We had all of our ERGs. We have a total of 8 employee resource groups at our company. All of our ERGs were on board with this. We had our auditorium, if you will, packed. So we're an enhancer to our already it's in flight, and then we're kind of like a voice, right? So I look at someone like Rodney. If Rodney was to walk past someone at the blackjack table and he said, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" They'll say, "Oh, everything's going okay." Most people aren't going to tell Rodney, the CEO, how things are really going, right? So for us, we get some of that unfiltered feedback from employees and from ourselves that then we can share with leadership to course correct, and that we can implement into our own things that we're doing, our own items that we have planned for the year. So overall, our D&I journey, our company's D&I journey has evolved over the past 15 years. It went from being an item on the plate of one of our senior executives to a standalone D&I leader. Today we have a department, a standalone department with over 10 people, with the VP headed by VP Amy Henneman, who's doing an awesome job with her team. We have 8 high-functioning employee resource groups, and people always say, well, how do you know they're high-functioning? Prism International over the past 3 years have rated 4 of our ERGs as top 25 out of 1,300 annual applicants. So from across the country, from Fortune 500 companies, from small companies. So the work that our ERGs do as enhancers is really excellent work. And then I'm also happy to share that it's not just one person's responsibility. So it's not just our CEO's responsibility or our corporate D&I responsibility or the ERG's responsibility. We're all working in concert together. So nearly every department has their own department or function, has their own diversity and inclusion council, in addition to our ERGs, in which they're doing things specific for their department. So as we think about like the finance function, because that's just an infinity for me and Rodney and nobody else. So as you think about the finance function, and our finance function has their own D&I council, and one of the things that they have it's one of their task items is recruiting more diversity. So, you know, they're helping other CPAs are helping finding other CPAs that look like them or friends that may not look like them, but that are diverse or talented to join our organization. So if your company doesn't have an ERG, I would strongly encourage your company to start one.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peavy. And Tammy, I wanted to come to you because with your new role with the Milwaukee rep, that seems like a more newer project. Could you tell us a bit more about that and kind of how it came to be?
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you asked me because I wanted to share that the role is really an extension of my work with my company.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as many of you that are on this call, I'm a PR firm first, communications, strategic communications. And so, as you would imagine, with the world spotlight now on having these conversations with racism, and I'm careful to say that it's the world spotlight because people of color, this has been our spotlight. This has been our issue.
Right.
We're not new to this. This is not something that, you know, with the murder of George Floyd became an issue for us. We have spent decades, as Rodney has suggested, this is centuries of structural racism that has been in existence. But because the world is now talking about it, it has a greater spotlight. Organizations have been calling and asking and wondering, how do we best address it? What is the role that we have to really talk about these critical issues, because our employees are encouraging us to do this. We feel a need to now have a much more aggressive platform around it in most cases. And so we were unlike other companies and organizations that were being called. And there was an audaciousness and a boldness in me to every organization that reached out. And that is, Athena doesn't do the pretty. We're not going to give you some great messaging. We're going to give you a nice little statement to sort of get you over the hump. Be very clear that our commitment to you, if you come on as a client, is that we're going to help you create an actionable strategy that is coupled with your great messaging around that. And really that was because we had made a commitment as an organization, my firm, that we would only work on transformational projects, which I didn't know. I didn't have the language back then to understand that it was really about equity. It was about diversity and inclusion. I just knew that we needed to have a role around impact. And that was the only way that we were going to proceed, is that we needed to see and feel change as an extension of our work. And so Milwaukee Rep, who I have had a relationship with in several capacities over the last 7 years, both as a volunteer, and part of this was also in some smaller contractual arrangements, had approached me in the same sort of boldness, I will say, and the same level of, if you are truly committed to doing the work, then we are ready to engage. If you're not willing to do the work, then it's not a project that I'm interested in being involved in. And so we had conversations. Again, Athena is my baby, and I have not abandoned it, contrary to people are like, oh, she's with the rep now. I'm like, yep, the rep and Athena. And it has been an incredible journey with Milwaukee Rep, because the commitment to what they have outlined as equity, diversity, and inclusion started before my role. It started probably a couple years ago with them creating an equity, diversity, and inclusion committee of their board, which was really the governance piece, and then bringing on a consultancy outside of Chicago, Kaleidoscope, to help do some of that work. And my role as their chief diversity officer is really to implement and actualize the plan. And so that work around what does that commitment look like? For me, it is really having the commitment and the boldness at the highest level of any organization. And also recognizing that the chief diversity officer is not the end all be all. Like, I'm not the savior for any organization. I'm one piece of a puzzle. one piece of what has to happen within an organization. And I love, Peavy, how you've lifted the ERGs have a role, and the diversity arm of Northwestern Mutual. It is all of us within organizations. And yes, you need champions, and you need those who understand how you implement policies that create uniformity across an organization. All of that is really critical. But one piece that I just want to lift for this discussion is that equity, diversity, and inclusion is not a program. It is not something that you sort of do and say, okay, we're going to create this program of. No, it needs to be a thread that is embedded in the very core of an organization's mission. It has to be executed and made actionable across an organization. So you don't get to say, well, I shouldn't say you don't get, but organizations should not say, well, our equity, diversity, and inclusion plan is relegated to this area of our organization. It truly is one that should be embedded in every area, and it should be embraced, and it should be moved and led at the highest level of an organization, but knowing that it has the support throughout that organization. And again, I think, you know, obviously this is 2 months for me being with Milwaukee Rep, but I understand that the commitment is there, and there is a journey. You know, people know the theater industry has a lot of work to do. The arts and culture institutions locally and nationally have a great deal of work to do. There's no question that this, you know, this is a heavy lift for many organizations, but particularly when we think of arts and culture for a host of reasons. But I believe that I can be a vehicle as one of those stones to help move that, because this is an institution I love, within a city that I love, a community that I adore. I haven't left for any significant amount of time. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it is what it is. And I just believe that we have to recognize that this work is not a sprint. It's a marathon, but it needs to have intensity and passion and commitment in this moment greater than we've ever experienced before.
And Tammy, that actually gets to a question we just received in our chat. That thread that you talked about that needs to be embedded in that organization, in that culture. What is the first step for organizations getting that embraced by the entire organization, as well as getting it recognized, getting that recognition that there is a need for change?
Yeah, so the I of EDI is the most critical. Oftentimes we think, oh, if we just can bring in more Black and brown people or more diverse people, and that is important. But the inclusion piece, the workplace culture, that is the starting place for how we can really see diversity efforts and equity really actualize, and it be where it is wrapped around actions. And so one of the things that I think about when you talk about this is starting with crucial conversations. So we're doing work through my firm, most recently with an international company who is trying to figure out, do we have a problem? Should we even be engaging in this? And I look at their leadership structure, and 95% of their leaders are white. And they asked, should we be doing this work? And I said, well, you just need to probably look around first and say, we have a 95% white leadership structure. Yeah, we probably need to do the work, but that conversation and buy-in is the critical piece. And I wish I could take credit for this, but I'm not. I just have been repeating that the work around diversity and inclusion and equity is not just a moral imperative, it's a business imperative. And it goes back to all of the things that Rodney, Peavy, and myself have lifted. And that is, this idea of taking a risk is not really a risk. When you have diverse perspectives, when you have diverse ideas, when you have diverse experiences, all of that contributes to an organization's bottom line. And so when we start to look at it as it is imperative in this moment that we understand that the complexities of the workplace require us to be innovative. It requires us to be have a different kind of mindset and approach, creativity. That requires people who look different to be in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And it requires people who are different to be at the leadership helm. And so how do we continue to make that case that it is both the right thing to do and the right thing to do from a business perspective? That is the starting point. You can't just go in and say to an organization, you need to have a commitment to EDI without having the crucial conversations that require the hard conversations about why this is important. So that's the starting point. Then you can begin to build what that plan looks like. And then it takes longer for you to actually implement it. But I would say starting with the crucial conversations is the important piece. One last thing, and I promise I'll hush.
No, that's okay.
It is crucial conversations and not courageous. There is nothing courageous about talking about race. It is necessary. It is crucial. It is not, you are not somehow courageous because you have a conversation about these issues around race. It is crucial.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tammy. I did want to share another question that we had from an individual who is a white male and recently joined his organization's D&I committee. And he's kind of struggling with how much he should speak versus listen, especially given, the privilege that he acknowledges he has. Can you speak to expectations or your feelings about non-POC advocates? And Peavy, I'm going to go to you first because you guys, with your D&I program, you do have some really great work with allies.
Yep. So I would say, kind of what Tammy had hinted at this earlier. First off, no one was around 400 years ago. So when we talk about things like white privilege, sometimes for white people that can be defensive. That could be like, oh my God, no one's acknowledging that you didn't put hard work into where you got today. But two things could be true, where you could have the benefits of white privilege and also are a hard worker. So those things both can be true. So as a white, especially as a white male, first, like really listening and understanding what the problem is, what are the concerns for your organization, and then two, I think more importantly is especially with COVID, like right now with COVID, the people who are sick with COVID aren't creating the vaccines, aren't creating their own healthcare plans, right? So we have professionals, doctors who are doing that. So as we think about where we're at with our country in terms of race relations and social inequality, it shouldn't be the Black people trying to solve this. Like, okay, now that you have this problem, you're in this mess, go and solve this problem for yourself. Like, the only way, from my opinion, that we're going to get further advancement is on this topic, is that if we have allies out the table who are willing to help solve this problem with us and for us. And I say for us because there's, Tammy mentioned how at one particular organization, 95% of the people, the leadership team was non-people of color. So the decision-making rights to really make sustainable change is going to occur by those who don't look like us, that then will trickle down and allow us, meaning people of color, to then have those seats at the table to further execute that change. So again, I don't want people on this call thinking like, oh my God, this is some type of radical movement. Like, no, like, and it's not meant to be like, in order for Black people to be successful, there has to be a portion of white people to be unsuccessful. No, that's not true either. But what it is true is that when you're at the table or when you're having a conversation, especially if you are a person that's not of that affinity group, and you're having conversations and the topic of that particular affinity group comes up, we're hoping one major step, which is a small step, is educate your peers. That education is key. So as you spread that knowledge out, it just goes further and further and further, so that as we have more people who are truly educated on this topic, then the changes can occur. I
Absolutely.
like this next question too. So I definitely have
Yeah,
tips on
feel free, go right ahead.
So Catherine, we did this at Northwestern Mutual, and the idea came to us from Prudential. So we implemented maybe 8 years ago a reverse mentoring program. So what a reverse mentoring program is that we had talented African American individuals serve as mentors. And GE, you might have heard about this from GE. I'm sure Prudential got it from GE with Jack Welch, but he did it for our technology perspective. Um, but talented African American individuals serve as mentors to our non-African American executives. Um, and the whole purpose was twofold. One, our executives needed to understand the African American experience within our NM culture because it was different than the experience for non-African Americans. And then two, they needed to understand the African American experience in Milwaukee. So our leaders and every leader serve as two critical points. They're recruiters and they recruit talent from across the country. And if I'm recruiting Rodney to come to Milwaukee, I need to tell Rodney that it snows here. I also need to tell him about some other stuff that happens in Milwaukee. But if you're not fully aware of um, things from an African American perspective, then you can't be the best recruiter. And then two, as that prior point, as our leaders are at the table and they have the ability to influence change, as they have the ability to make decisions about what we should do strategically for our company or what we should do as it relates to employee engagement, the more that they are aware of that experience, then the better decisions that they can have, that they can make. And we've expanded it. The pilot was with African Americans, but we since then expanded it to include all of our ERGs. And then we've dropped it down from our executives because things we talk about too is that frozen middle, that middle layer, right? So you get all the executives, they get good with it. And it's like, well, why the heck are we still have this problem? You got to keep driving it down. So then it's that middle layer and having them serve in this reverse mentoring program as well. Then have them choose. Have them choose do you want to learn more about the LGBT experience within Northwestern Mutual and within our city? Do you want to learn about the women experience, Hispanic, Asian? So it's allowing our executives and middle leaders to build their knowledge and do it in a individualized way. So now I'll be more comfortable after I build a rapport with Rodney. I'll be more comfortable asking him questions. And then two, which is probably the most critical piece of all this, is now me as an executive, I'll be willing to serve as a sponsor for Rodney.
Nice. Thank you, Peavy. And I do want to pose that same question to our other panelists. So Peavy was answering Catherine's note. I'm curious what projects or campaigns our guests are working on that excite them or give them hope in addressing the racial inequities our community and nation are facing. So Rodney, let's start with you. What are some programs you're excited about with your organization or just in your general circle?
Well, I think the important part is understanding the different cultures. One of the things we've been doing for years is having or celebrating things like Black History Month, Asian Heritage Month, Native American Heritage Month. Until you truly understand the people, you really don't know how to adapt to them, don't know how to communicate. So we've taken upon ourselves every year to celebrate the entire month by having sharing of experiences, education, food, everything related to that particular culture throughout the year. That way, every member of the organization, from your frontline team member to your executive, can get a better understanding in terms of who those individuals really are and where they're coming from. It's one thing when you hire a supervisor from one part of town and you have a frontline person from another part of town and you have to work together. Certainly, how individuals deal with each other in the streets is different than how they work in the office. Until they can figure out how to communicate, things is going to be just like they are throughout the country. This big divisive nature that we all face every single day. So until you can get comfortable talking and communicating with that person, the only thing you can do is figure out a way to talk more and accept that other person's culture and that other person's difference before you can actually put a hold on it. Now, it has to start at the top as well. And like I think Peavy and Tammy said, you have to have a program in place, but you also have to have resources and have to have someone monitoring to make sure that every level within the organization has buy-in and understands the whole purpose of what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rodney. Tammy, how about you? Any programs that you're working on, whether with the rep or with Athena, that you're excited about that gives you kind of that hope?
I think all of the work that we're doing with some of the questions that people have raised with organizations that are trying to figure it out, like what should we be doing next? How should we be addressing these issues? How do we get buy-in in our organizations? That is fuel right now to my soul. It's hard. It's not easy work. It is, you really have to go into the work glass half full and knowing, just believing that change can happen. But it's also, again, incredibly exciting for me. But there's a public awareness campaign that I know some of the D&I committee members are aware of, that our firm was leading with a number of African American leaders, and it's the You Matter campaign. And it really started off as in response to the virus that I don't like to give name to, but it started off in response to the tremendous amount of cases that were happening in the African American community, that the number of people that it, originally was not impacting Black community and brown, and, probably in April, late April, the tide really started to shift. And, as you know, we are now as a nation with, a significant almost 200,000 lives that have been lost to this virus. And this campaign really was set out to address a gap in messaging. So one of the things that we have not lifted here, but as PRSA, it would be remiss of me not to talk about how important communication is in all of these efforts, and good messaging, and making sure that people are clear about strategies and goals, whether it relates to EDI or anything else. But this particular campaign, what we recognize is that there was a gap in how we were communicating to communities of color about this virus. And we took the approach very early on that the lens in which we needed to look at this was from a structural racism perspective, as it relates to how people access the health systems, as people access quality health, and the history of Black people in particular with the medical profession, and what the harm that's been inflicted for generations. And so this campaign has really been moving forward in that respect. And I'm just really, it gets me excited because it's allowing us to touch a new generation of influencers who are now engaged in ways that they were not. It has allowed us to have a message of hope, because what we felt was very present was very deficit language. It was very compliant language, like stay at home. Well, people weren't staying at home. And so what are the other ways that we can talk to these communities of color? And so as it connects, I think, to this conversation, understanding that the work that we all do is connected. Our humanity connects all of us. That's why this is important. Black Lives Matter is not about better access, or that there is a desire to be treated differently. It is really about being treated fairly. And so as we think about all of this, what is it that connects us? It is our humanity. And so these issues around race, these issues around inclusion and diversity cannot be relegated only to people of color. It has to be a conversation that we're all ready to engage in and dig in. Lindsay, can I just say, I wanted to just respond to, there was a question around, as a white male,
Yes.
how much of this can I, how much of this is me being quiet and listening versus me talking. And I will say that for all of us, we all have a role to play. Okay, so let's be very clear around this work, that all of us have an incredible role to play in making sure that our workplaces are more equitable. And there are going to be times that we all need to lean in as active listeners and active doers. And I would say the more you can listen and understand, seek understanding, weigh in on those areas that you believe that you certainly can be an advocate for. I don't think any of us get to determine how you respond or what you say. I think people have to be authentic to themselves, but also recognizing that we all have a role to play in this. It is really important to know. And if I'm offering advice to white allies that are a part of this conversation, the more you can listen and understand and seek to understand, that is the primary position. When you can activate your voice and action, lean into that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tammy. I did want to address one question also. We have one individual who has a workplace that's very separate. And Peavy, I think I'll bring this one to you because you have kind of that similar issue with the field, and even at Northwestern Mutual, you have multiple buildings and all of that. What are some ways that you can kind of build that culture with the varied locations of all of the employees?
Yeah, I think that truly is tough. It is tough because every area, if you will, has their own culture, has their own experience. So getting people to engage that are in multiple areas is tough, but it's critical that you have good representation from across your organization. I think the exact question that Stephanie had, if I'm answering it appropriately, is, most of us are all in a remote environment now with this virus that we shall not name. But nearly all of us are in this work at home environment, and there are some parts of your company where employees are still coming in, and there are parts of your company where employees are not coming in. And how do you balance that engagement? And I would say leverage technology as best as you can. I give great kudos to you, Lindsay, for learning how to use Zoom this week. And pulling this meeting off. So leverage the technology as best you can, and then think about innovative ways to engage with employees that you know don't have to take them away from their personal lives. Because I don't know about you guys, but I feel like in this environment I am working more so than ever. It's not a work-life balance, it's more of a work-life blend. I have intentional that my desk is set up in the furthest part of our house. So if I'm coming to this, I am coming to work. So just being intentional about how you engage employees, that it's a blend of, maybe it's over the lunch hour, or maybe it's like a breakfast meeting and everybody, bring your own favorite box of cereal and let's have a conversation and let's talk.
Mm-hmm. And I really quick, I know we're right at 1 o'clock, but I wanted to go over to Rodney because you also have a similar situation where your associates are just all over the floor, all over the building. How do you maintain that culture across levels, across different associates, different areas? How do you maintain that culture?
Well, when it's built into your organization, it's not too hard to maintain it. I mean, every day when we come to work, and certainly health and safety is at the top of our mindset each day when we come to work today, as opposed to pre-virus. And as we move forward through, the next several months, it's just a matter of everybody staying on point, keeping in mind that we still have a mission. We still have to execute our values like we did before the virus actually hit. So as I walk the floor every day, I talk to team members, I talk to the guests, I talk to everyone on the floor to make sure that, we'll get through this. It's just a matter of being patient and staying diligent, to the cause. So, I think everybody has to realize that it's not going away anytime soon. Hopefully it will, but unfortunately it's not. But we just have to stay the course.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I really quickly just want to share something. One of the questions that we had was actually about tips to kind of start these conversations. So really quickly, please excuse that. All right. We do have a little kind of assignment or activity for everyone to try when they kind of leave this space. So I will go ahead and drop a link to this in the chat, but also when we send out the recording, I'll attach it to that email. But this is a great way to start having those conversations that we mentioned. The recommendation for this project is just to have really a basic discussion, just like we've been having today, whether it's over coffee or lunch, whether it's one-on-one, or even with your entire department or group. And just kind of use this as a guideline and a way to have that first step to getting to know your colleagues, your direct reports, whatever level you are, just to start having those initial conversations. So I really want to make sure that everyone takes this piece and uses that to start that. And I'll just say one more thing as we're wrapping up here. We will have the second part of this discussion where we will kind of get more, and we did a great job of it today as well, but getting into more of those actionable steps that we're going to take to get to that change and really incorporating that into your culture and being that thread that Tammy mentioned. So kind of right now, I just set aside time for us to have kind of a virtual networking. Everyone feel free to go ahead and unmute yourselves and feel free to just have conversation. And if there are any questions for our panelists as well, if you're able to stay with us, we're going to keep this open through 1:30. So feel free to just shout out some questions or some thoughts that you've had on today's event. We actually do have one from Sarah. Thank you, Peavy, for that comment about work-life balance and that like when you're here, you're ready to work. And that's a great way to think about diversity and inclusion and learning more about people as well. Just being present with that person and really getting to know them, I think is really, really great.
Lens, I have a question. I can jump in.
Yeah.
This is for Peavy. Peavy, that was a great tips that you offered. Took a lot of good notes there. Question, and may have overheard it, but I forget, are you from Wisconsin, from the Milwaukee area, or are you a transplant?
Yep, born and raised in Milwaukee. I spent pretty much my entire life in Milwaukee with the exception of 6 short months in Florida.
Got it. Perfect. Cool.
And Lindsay, the last kind of like the tip that you had shared, I'll probably just add on one thing to it because everyone's going to be different in their D&I journey. If you're like, hey, help me understand, how do I put in a kitchen sink, or I had a plumber, like, apologies if you heard banging during the call. Bathroom's getting redone right above me. But the plumber was here yesterday. I am not handy, but I have no problem asking questions, as Tammy can attest from me being in her classes. So, if you start off by saying, help me understand blah, 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 I think people will be willing to engage with you and have a conversation. So if you help me understand, why do African Americans have such a strong connection to things that happen in the news when they see another African American being shot and so forth? And I'll give you that response, from my perception. So, the things that have happened in our country over the past 5 years, especially in the African American community have been really highlighted because of social media, especially now we have videos to see things. And like videos, you can look at a video and like, you can see the fact someone was shot 7 times. So whether that, you don't have to be racist or anything like that, I'm not questioning that, just the fact that the person was shot 7 times. Um, and then you have the fact that, in 2014, Tamir Rice, a young African-American boy, was at a park playing with a toy gun, like kids play with. Um, and, someone called 911, and in this 911 call, they were very, very like, hey, look, I don't know if I should really be calling. There's nothing really going on. I'm pretty sure it's a toy gun. I hate that I'm calling and doing this. 12 seconds from when that police officer arrived on the scene, that young 14-year-old was dead. And then we see things like Tuesday night, after the Kenosha incident where the young man shot 2 people and injured 1. Again, not judging why he shot them or anything like that. I'm just saying facts, that he shot and killed 2 people, injured 1, and he had a huge AK-47 gun. And he was able to walk past police with his hands up and go home and be arrested the next day. And then you have someone who shoots up a church in the Carolinas, and again, able to get arrested. So there's this strong emotional connection or reaction that African Americans are having, because we see the double standard play out, and we see it play out with life and death scenarios. So there's the double standard that exists as we all reflect, and as Rodney was talking about in our own professional journey. But when we see it play out with life and death scenarios, it just has a visceral reaction to us.
It's so true, Peavy. It is. And I think that many don't realize that kind of emotional toll that it takes on you, especially in situations where you're the only in your office, and to kind of go in and feel like you're kind of going through this alone. No one understands like fully what you're experiencing. But that is an excellent point. I also thought it was interesting. We're starting to hear more about Milwaukee's health commissioner and how she's actually leaving not only her role, but the entire city of Milwaukee after experiencing racism on the job. I'd love to hear our panelists' thoughts on that. I know we don't have all of the information, but I have to say, even before she said that there was racism going on, when she said that things outside of my control, I immediately knew, I'm like, oh, I bet I know what she was experiencing. But I'd love to get your thoughts, about how difficult that can be in the workplace, and, helping to help our allies understand that a bit better.
Well, I can kick us off. I think one of the things for me as a man, there's certain things that I am oblivious to, that I have no clue that's going on, that impact women. It's not that I'm sexist. It's just that it's not my type of mind when I wake up in the morning. And some of the things that I've experienced recently, where other women have like called things out, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a great point. Like, I didn't even see that. Like, it like opens my eyes, and now I'm like more cognizant of people's behaviors and people's comments when other women are in the room, or if they're not in the room, just seeing like, okay, well, are we being inclusive from that matter? It's the same way for people of color. So for our allies, it's just as, was eye-opening for me as people, educated me and I asked more questions. It's the same way for people of color. And I give, one prime example of, so we all know about the Breonna Taylor incident. And then just last week, I was reading an article where they offered a plea deal to her ex-boyfriend if he signed a statement saying that she was part of the drug ring with him. And they granted him full immunity if he was to sign it. One, they came out and said, oh no, we never offered full immunity where he would only do 2 months of probation and everything would be expunged. They're like, oh no, we never offered him full immunity. Then it was like, oh no, well, it was always with the sentence term. Like, but they didn't acknowledge that it was never a question about whether they offered the plea deal. They were like, yeah, we're good with that. Like, yes, we've offered that. And if you open your eyes and just say, okay, wait a minute, we're offering a plea deal to someone for someone who's dead.
Right.
Like, what is that accomplishing in the grand scheme of things? What is the motivation behind that? And once you start asking those questions and just opening your eyes more and more and more, I think then, you know, as allies, you can fully understand not only what's going on in the world, but then start asking those same questions about what's going on in your organization. Why did so-and-so get that project and why not Tammy? Well, why is Rodney the acting CFO and why is so-and-so the full-time CEO just 3 years ago? Like, when you start asking those questions and saying, okay, well, why? Just help me understand. I think that's where you can really, you know, uncover a lot of things that's just right under your nose.
Mm-hmm. And that's so key, especially, and that's where the help me understand portion of that becomes important, because it forces you to stop and think it through. And it may be unconscious. It's not something necessarily that everyone's just saying, I'm going to wake up and be racist today. That's not how it works.
No.
You know, it's really just that, just not understanding or not knowing. Peavy, you just mentioned that, you know, you won't necessarily think about it because you're not a woman, but you know, there are things happening. And if it comes to your attention and you do have that sort of help me understand kind of mentality, it does open up opportunity for you to learn more and to be more aware as well. I did really want to bring up this question that just came in, and I'm just going to read it. How can we have productive discussions about this at work when it comes up in casual conversation, not a structured conversation, not something like this, but when like recent news events happen, like just Peavy, some of the things you mentioned, it quickly becomes very polarized and politicized. How do we make those conversations more productive and having that better understanding of each other? What are some tips you'd recommend?
Tammy's a PR person here.
Yeah, I know. She's trying to be shy because I know she thinks she talked too much, but she didn't. She's
right. And whatever she's about to say, I got my notebook. I'm taking notes.
No pressure here. So my first reaction to this is there are so many things that are happening now, as Peavy sort of laid out, you know, all of the things that have received national attention. I recently posted on Instagram, what about all of the cases that weren't filmed? Because while we're talking about the George Floyds and the Jacob Blakes, there are countless others that we have not heard about. And I show up to this conversation not as the Chief Diversity Officer for Milwaukee Rep or the founder and principal of Athena Communications first. I show up as Tammy, the mother of a 17-year-old Black male. That's who I am first and foremost, aside from all of the time, even Lloyd's wife. I'm London's mama first. Even though I've been Lloyd's wife for longer than that. The truth is, I am, there are some conversations that are very triggering. So my response to that is, unless we are seeking to understand, unless we are engaged in a conversation that is about solutions, I don't want no part of it. And that's my own choice. And I'm not suggesting that this is the most appropriate way, but there are some conversations that don't warrant a conversation. There are some discussions that people will choose to have that, to protect your sanity, to protect we haven't talked about, and I wanted to talk about this, we haven't talked about mental health.
Yes.
As it relates to all of this, that we're all experiencing higher levels of anxiety, and not just people of color, but I would argue all of us are experiencing that, but certainly, you know, at a heightened level, I think people of color. By the time my son probably turned about 12 or 13, my anxiety around him being gone away from me is unbelievable. I shared this story, and I'll share this really quickly, and I know it doesn't answer this question, but it kind of does. So my son is now, I was sharing earlier, he had his 17th birthday on September 4th, this past Friday. And I remember last year we had decided, we live in Milwaukee, the northwest side of Milwaukee, but we had made a decision. We were going to go get his glasses fixed it was a weird time of the day. So we said, well, let's go to Walmart in Peavy. So we go to this Walmart and we're in the store. We go and get his glasses tightened. And so I said, well, why don't we do a little bit of shopping while we're waiting on them to get fixed? And so he and I are together, and he says, Mom, I'm going to go, I don't know, go do something, go to another aisle to pick up something. And I was shopping in this aisle, and within 30 seconds of him being gone, I was immersed in anxiety, unlike I have ever felt in my whole life. Just thinking about it gives me pause. And I was trying to balance both my panic in that moment with the reality of not being a crazy Black woman in aisle 22, with also tempering my anxiety so my son would not feel how I was feeling. And I caught, his name is London. I said, London, and I'm calling him, and I'm now calling him out of a panic. And I'm managing all of these emotions. And what rushed in my mind, those 30 seconds he was away from me, now almost a minute, was, what if he's accosted? What if there's a presumption that he's doing something wrong? He's one of the kindest, kind-hearted kids you'll ever meet. But what if in this moment, my son is mistaken for someone else, or someone decides that his life is not worth, I mean, it was overwhelming. And he comes back, and I'm like, you know, and I'm yelling. He's like, I told you, lady, that I'm going over here. And I had to pull it together. But I think about those moments. We haven't talked about microaggressions. We haven't talked about unconscious bias. But I think about all of the triggering points that I encounter on a daily basis, and how often I suppress it without even knowing. Because if I address everything that I ever dealt with as a person of color, I'd go crazy.
Right.
I would literally lose my mind if I tackled everything that was triggering. So I've learned, as many people, but I'll speak for me, I've learned to sort of suppress it, and you move forward and you press through it, and you think maybe that wasn't as bad. And it all came to a head in that moment in this Peavy Walmart, with my son being away from me. And how many of those moments have I experienced as a mom of a teen? But as he goes off to college, I'm praying that I'm able to manage this differently. But it's the experience of Black people. It is the experience of brown people. It is the experience of oppressed people. It is the experience of living in systems that are inherently biased and inherently have racism. So when I think about conversations that go completely awry, some of them I choose not to participate in. When you talk about the commissioner, I was noticeably quiet because she is a friend. And I am fully aware of some of the challenges that she has faced. And I'm fully aware of what it means to be a Black leader in the city of Milwaukee. And so some of those conversations I choose not to engage.
Sure.
One, because I'm putting on my PR hat, and there are certain things that you are quiet about, and you engage and you move the needle in other ways. And then there are some instances where you have to lift your voice because it is necessary.
And that's so true. And I think that's a key part of when you're having conversations, like understand that that person may not be comfortable sharing something, and that's okay. I think it's still worthwhile to broach the topic, but just be aware and don't take it personally if someone doesn't want to go there, and respect that about that person. I think that's important.
One of the things that we do at Northwestern Mutual is we have what we call listening sessions. So it's sessions where employees can sign up for, they can listen in on the topic. We've been having a lot of community conversation related topics. And we either have outside speakers, or we have it facilitated by our corporate D9 department internally. And it's an opportunity for employees to listen. The majority just come and they just want to hear what the experience and perspective. And then for employees to chime in and just make a comment. It's not, we're still at work, but it's not meant to be a, it's a space where like, hey, this event happened over the weekend when I saw that it impacted me this way. Like, oh, okay, thank you for sharing. Like sometimes people just want to get it out, right? And Tammy was talking about it earlier in terms of mental health. So a lot of these conversations would have occurred at the cooler or the coffee walk or at the lunch table. And because so many of us, our employees are all like remote now, and we just can't talk to each other like we would normally do, and just like bring up this conversation as we walk to get a soda or a candy bar or whatever. So having outlets for employees to kind of just like, to get it out, I think is key. So having a listening session, I think, will be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Do you, Peavy, I think a while back, Northwestern Mutual actually had like reflection rooms as well. Where do they still do that? Well, I know, of course, with the remote nature, but
Yeah, we haven't done it in a
pre-COVID.
while.
Okay.
So it's evolved
Mm-hmm.
to the, it's evolved to more of these listening sessions. And so yeah, we haven't done that in a while.
Yeah. I would like to share kind of a personal experience as well, something that happened to me over this weekend. And Tammy, you'll appreciate this as a mom. So I was maid of honor at my best friend's wedding, and my best friend is white. And I was pretty much the only Black person in that wedding, in that church, in that reception hall. And my mother knew that. She was too afraid to go because of COVID and everything. But she was very frightened for me. And I don't think that many people realize, especially parents, and I can even go back to high school. My grandmother, I actually didn't take part in my band's, I forget what it was, but it was kind of this organization where families would host young musicians, and then they play and have this big concert and all of that. I actually didn't go because my grandmother, who is from Mississippi, just did not like the fact that I would be staying with the host family, and we weren't sure how they felt about Black people or how they would respond. You know, my school may possibly not share that I'm Black, and when I get there, what am I gonna receive? So I actually even didn't participate at all just because of that fear. And I say all that to say that there is a lot of fear as a Black person going out into the world. You don't know how you'll be received. You don't know what will come at you when you're out in that world. So if there's something I could say to white allies, just be cognizant of that, especially when you have onlys. Those of us who are onlys in our offices, just be aware of that and find ways to really bring that inclusivity piece to the forefront, and making sure that we feel comfortable and that we're aware. And of course, that could be applied to many different facets of diversity. You know, I think about disabled individuals. You know, we at Visit Milwaukee, we have a lot of activities and things that we do that aren't necessarily accessible. And it's like, okay, we need to think about that. And when we're booking a event or something like that, how do we make sure that there are opportunities for differently abled individuals to participate? So it's really just seeking to understand, as we've been saying, and knowing where people are coming from. Okay, unless anyone has anything else, I was going to go ahead and close it. I really appreciate everyone hanging in there. I know we were initially going to do a group breakout, but we were having such a good discussion. I didn't want to interrupt it. So I'm glad that we got to have this conversation. And kind of the next part of this conversation, where this was more of a reflection, although we did get into a little bit of solutioning. Next time we will kind of get those concrete actions that companies can take. So our panelists will be Morgan Phelps, she's founder of Colorful Connections, and Dr. Cedric Burrows, he's assistant professor with Marquette University, and they've both done a lot of work in this space, and I'm anxious to hear kind of what they have for us. And you can register for that if you haven't already by going to prsawis.org. And thank you all for attending today. Any final questions before I go ahead and disconnect? Okay, and as always, feel free, that same website, we do have a contact form. If you think of anything later and you want us to address it, feel free to use that option. But thank you all for being here. Thank you so much to our panelists. I just could listen to you guys speak all day. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.